Hey, how you doing? This is Ken Kinter, and welcome to day 398 of my journey through leukemia. First an update, and then we'll talk about some other stuff. The update is I'm feeling well. That's a good thing. We'll talk a bit about the lab work roller coaster that's been going on. That's been my big battle, is by keeping my blood work levels up. But appetite is good, energy is good. So most things are good. And of course, you see this going on. The hair is back. It is much whiter than it used to be, and it is curly. I don't know what to do with that. So, curly hair people, you're going to have to help me out with how to maintain this thing. I've heard rumors that it's temporary and that it will straighten out over time, but we're getting near the 6 month mark and look much straighter. Actually, it's gotten curlier as it's gotten longer. So we'll see how it goes. I'm just happy it's back. The mustache is back. The beard is back. This is back. Eyebrows, missed my eyebrows. They're back. And everything else is back too, but we're just going to leave that right there. Um, so that part has been good. So one thing I've been thinking about is I was thinking about the different stages of going through an experience like this. And I don't mean the stages of, stage 4 cancer or stage 3, stage 2. I'm not talking about that. But just thinking about this experience in terms of if you go through different stages of it, like stages of grief or stages of change. And I'm still on the early stage of this and, thinking about it. And it will undoubtedly change over time. And of course, this is probably also subjective to me. But this is the process that I've gone through as I look at it, and I'll continue to change it up as I go. Stage 1 is I'm sick, and I'm sick is like you've been sick 1,000 times in your life. Hopefully, you live long enough to be sick 1,000 times more. But just being sick, just not feeling well, but nothing else on top of it. Stage 2 is I'm more than sick. There's something more going on than just being ill. And the idea of, wait a minute, maybe this is potentially lethal, So stage 2 is kind of like I'm more than sick. It's almost like I'm dying. In fact, I compared it to the end of The Return of the King, where you see the ship with the elves and Bilbo going off into the distance. I felt like my body, I didn't feel like I was leaving. I felt like my body was leaving and I'm just left behind on the shore. That was how I felt. A scary and dissociated sort of feeling. Stage 3 is when the diagnosis happens and you find out what the thing actually is. So now you know what your enemy is, and very difficult news to hear and very difficult news to convey to other people. You feel like you're hurting your loved ones by telling them what's going on with you. So how do you like that? How do you like the idea of either you got to give them this awful news or you got to lie to them? That's a horrible, horrible choice. And I went for coming straight at them. And I'd love to tell you some noble thought process went into that, but I just didn't have time, energy, or wherewithal to come up with a story. And I figured, hey, you know what? The truth is the truth. Whether it's pretty or ugly, it's still the truth. Stage 4 is surviving the illness because, of course, this is a lethal thing, and this is now a lifelong battle has begun. Everybody's going to die of something, but when you get a label put on something that's here for you right now, that's a different sort of story. So, surviving the illness is the next thing because I wasn't even in good enough shape to go right into chemo. They needed a couple days to beef me up so that I could even handle the treatment. I'm sure that's not an unusual occurrence. Depending on how aggressive the cancer is, depending on how long it took to go in and get help, which in my case was probably about 6 weeks. Those are some variables in there. Stage 5, surviving the treatment. The treatment is brutal, as anyone who knows can say, and apparently used to be a whole lot more brutal in the past. So I'm grateful for those who have gone before and learned the really hard lessons and, you know, went through chemo in its earlier stages so that they could advance it to where it is now. So you got to survive the illness, then you got to survive the treatment. The next of the survival stages is surviving the long-term consequences of the treatment. So, okay, so you've survived that initial round of cancer, leukemia, whatever it is. You've survived the infusion treatment, which is those lovely 8 admissions where they give you all the chemo and stuff is real. But now you got to survive the long term. So, for example, you can become diabetic in the hospital. You can, like what I'm dealing with now is fatty liver disease. And part of fatty liver disease is hereditary. Part of fatty liver disease is your habits. For example, my own obesity, my own love processed and fast food, my own sugar intake, being overweight, all those sorts of things. Excuse me. Alcohol use plays into this as well. So you got to survive the long-term effects of the illness. And the way I would put it is, I'm feeling better than I felt in well over a year, over 14 months now, but I still feel like I've aged several years in one. I mean, and the hair will attest to that. Um, where you are on one hand afraid to take on some of the things physically that you took on before because of this illness, but then you also feel like there's less of you. I hate to use the word pre-geriatric, but you kind of feel that way. If there's a job that involves heavy lifting or heavy work or something like that, my first thought is, who can I pay to do this? Because I don't want to, you know, I don't feel as up to it as I did anymore. I was doing this already as I got into my mid 50s, but this definitely accelerated that process. So within this stage 6, the surviving the long term of the illness, and again, I'm not long term. I've been out of the hospital, out of infusion for about 5 months. That's not exactly a long time, but it's the beginning of that part of the journey. One of the first hallmarks of many of these stages, all the way down the line, is your lab work. Your lab work becomes like the most important thing in your life, not that you want it to be. And in the roller coaster, all of a sudden your lab values can just crash out. So certain blood values, like your white blood cells, your ANCs, your neutrophils, which are the warrior cells of the white blood cells, those can just bottom out to like 0 on you. And in the case of the ANCs and the white blood cells, you don't feel it. You feel fine. You just happen to be walking around without an immune system and you're susceptible to anything. I mean, you feel like if somebody sneezes within a foot of you, you're done. Except you don't know. You're just walking around doing your thing. So you feel fine, you feel great, you're out doing your thing, but you need to be careful because you're in this position of being so susceptible. There are other lab values that crash out too. Platelets crash, hemoglobin crashes. Now those you feel when your hemoglobin's low, when your platelets are low. I don't know how to describe it any better than to say you just feel gassed. You feel like you're wearing a 50-pound metal coat on you everywhere you go. And you just tire easily and you nap a lot. You can't take things on. And you're just spent easier. Again, feels like getting old way ahead of your time. Um, so you ride these roller coasters and they go down and they crash out and they come back. And so I joke that every time you go in to get your blood work done, which is every 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, depending on how well you're doing. For me, I've been riding the 1 to 2 now for quite a while. Um, it's like the reverse lottery, because you're just hoping the numbers come up good. Because if the numbers come up the wrong way, there's got to be all sorts of other interventions involved. You can be admitted for that. They give you different medication for that, or they can stop your outpatient chemo for that. For example, they've stopped my outpatient chemo 3 times in 5 months. They stopped it because my liver numbers soared, and and then other times because my ANCs crashed so low that it's not safe to continue the treatment. So those are the things you deal with. And I've watched some other people going through this at the same time as me go through the same deal. And that's been difficult. So, and what that can do is when your ANCs drop out, you're technically called neutropenic, which I've talked about before. And again, that basically means no immune system. I'm sure there's a better medical definition. And then you have to quarantine yourself to the house. So I've been quarantined here for a month in the past, and I've been quarantined for a week or two in the past. And, just trying to deal with it the best I can. I go about 3, 4 days, and then I start to get a little squirrely. And at that point, I either have to take a ride in the car or go to the shore or do something. Um, and then you kind of strike this balance where there's something that might increase your exposure to people or illness, but at the same time you're a little stir crazy. You think of Jack Torrance in The Shining. So you start doing things in a little bit of a smarter way so that there's less contact with people, um, so that you can maximize your health. So all of this is about balance. You can just lock yourself up in the house and not leave again and die anyway. Or you can go live your life the way you did before and expose yourself to all sorts of things. I mean, I did the trio of the flu, COVID, and RSV all in 1 year. And it was through exposure to people, whether it was in the hospital or out. I mean, you could still get sick at home, right? So that's kind of where things are now is, I'm going to be looking back at a bunch of my videos, and I'm going to be talking about when this was a sprint, not a marathon. And we're definitely into the marathon stage now, where how do we take care of ourselves long term? How do I protect my liver? Because a lot of these drugs are really amazingly liver toxic. Even if I didn't have any hereditary predisposition to fatty liver, or my habits were perfect, which they have never been. Let's just make that clear. Um, Three of the medications I've been on are listed under fatty liver as potential causes. So you're putting this puts a major beating on the liver. So whatever shape your liver was in going in is critical, and of course keeping it well is critical. For example, mine has shown a propensity for bouncing back, but it can be knocked down too, especially by these drugs. So it's my job not to make it any more difficult than it already is. I can tell you my alcohol intake has decreased by probably between half and three quarters um, in the last year. Every bartender around here knows me, and I get an iced tea first and questions later. That's kind of how it works because I'm usually out to watch a game and eat something and watch a game. But I need to be really careful because that's exposure to people, and then that's also exposure to some of my favorite foods, none of which are have high nutritional value and are probably not so great for the liver. So anyway, I feel like I'm rambling about things, but that's the update, and that's how things are going stage wise. I'm still here. I'm not planning on going anywhere, and it's very nice to be back at work and back teaching and back working with clients, and back being in my life and starting to travel and plan things on that are on my bucket list and on my wife's bucket list and start taking them off. You got to do it smart, and you always have to have an exit strategy or a plan B, but you don't stop living, and that's really the balance: is how do you keep living, but also live smart with the illness. So with that, I'm going to sign off, but I appreciate you watching, and I appreciate your presence in my life, no matter what it is, because that's all part of the reason of the why. I understand more as time goes on why people stop fighting, and I don't have anything disrespectful to say about them at all. It's a brutal battle, and I understand if someone says enough. I totally get it. That is not me at this point, and a big reason for that is all the things that I think about that I'm not ready to be done with, and that includes all the things I mentioned before, but also spending time with the people in my life and doing the things in my life that make it worth living. So, anyway, you all have a good one. It's a pleasure talking to you as always, and I will catch up with you next time. Take care.